The gunshot through her bedroom window at 3 in the morning shattered more than just glass. It shattered any illusion that Patricia Morrison was safe on her own land. She hit the floor hard, her heart hammering against her ribs as shards rained down on her quilt. The September night air of 1876 rushed through the jagged hole, carrying with it the sound of hoofbeats thundering away into the darkness. Patricia lay there for a long moment, her nightgown tangled around her legs, her breath coming in sharp gasps. This was the third incident in as many weeks, and each one had grown bolder. First, it had been her fence lines cut. Then, her well had been poisoned with rotting meat. Now this. She knew exactly who was behind it. Randolph Caine, the cattle baron who controlled nearly everything worth controlling in this corner of California, had made his intentions clear from the moment her father died 6 months ago. He wanted the Morrison Ranch, all 200 acres of it, because it sat right in the middle of his sprawling empire like a stone in his boot. Her land had water, good grazing, and access to the mountain passes. Without it, his cattle had to take a longer route to market. Patricia pushed herself up slowly, glass crunching beneath her palms. She was 22 years old, alone except for her aging ranch hand, Miguel, and she was terrified. But she would die before she let Randolph Caine know that. She lit a lamp with shaking hands and surveyed the damage. The bullet had buried itself in the far wall, right above where her mother's portrait hung. Her mother, who had died bringing her into this world. Her father, who had worked himself to death trying to build something lasting. This land was all she had left of them, and she would not give it up. But as dawn broke over the Sierra Nevada foothills, and she swept up the glass, Patricia had to admit the truth to herself. She could not do this alone much longer. Miguel was 70 if he was a day, and while he was loyal, he was no match for Caine's hired guns. She needed help, but there was no law in Coloma that would stand against Randolph Caine. The sheriff was on his payroll, as were half the businessmen in town. She was still mulling over her options when Miguel came to the house for breakfast, his weathered face creasing with concern when he saw the broken window. "Señorita Patricia, this is too much," he said in his accented English. "You must leave. Go to Sacramento to your mother's cousin." "This is my home, Miguel. I'm not leaving." "Then you must find protection, someone who does not fear Caine." "And where exactly would I find such a person?" Patricia asked, pouring coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Miguel was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "There is a man. Lives up in the high country, above Coloma. They call him Xerxes Hawthorne, though most just call him the Mountain Man. He comes to town maybe twice a year for supplies, keeps to himself, but I have heard stories." "What kind of stories?" "That he is not a man to cross, that he fears nothing and no one, that he came west after the war and wanted only to be left alone." Miguel paused. "And that he has no love for men like Caine, who think they can take what they want through force." Patricia considered this. She had heard whispers about the hermit who lived somewhere in the mountains, but she had never seen him herself. The stories painted him as something between a man and a legend, dangerous, unpredictable, more comfortable with bears and wolves than people. But what choice did she have? "Where would I find him?" she asked. Miguel shook his head. "You do not find him, señorita. He finds you. But if you were to ride up toward Eagle's Peak, toward the old trapper's cabin near Feather Falls, and if he were watching, which he always is, then perhaps he would show himself, or perhaps not. He is not a man who can be predicted." Patricia made her decision. She would give herself one more chance. She would ride into the mountains, and if this Xerxes Hawthorne did not show himself, she would go to Sacramento and let Randolph Caine have his victory. But she would try this first because she was her father's daughter, and Morrisons did not give up easily. She packed light some food, water, her father's rifle, and a bedroll. She left Miguel to watch the ranch and set out at mid-morning when the September sun was warm but not brutal. The ride up into the foothills took most of the day. The land grew steeper and wilder with each mile, the oak and manzanita giving way to pine and fir. She followed old game trails and half-remembered paths from childhood trips with her father. By late afternoon, she could hear the distant thunder of Feather Falls. She pushed on, though her mare was tired and she herself was exhausted from lack of sleep. The old trapper's cabin Miguel had mentioned came into view just as the sun began to sink behind the peaks, a sagging structure of logs and moss, long abandoned. Patricia dismounted and looked around. The forest pressed close on all sides, dark and watchful. She felt suddenly foolish. What had she expected? That some legendary mountain man would simply materialize because she needed him to? She was tying her horse to a tree when she heard the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. "That's far enough," a voice said from somewhere in the shadows. It was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "State your business." Patricia froze, her hand still on the reins. She could not see him, which meant he could kill her before she even knew where he was. "My name is Patricia Morrison," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm looking for Xerxes Hawthorne." "Why?" "Because I need help. Because a man with money and guns is trying to take my land and I have nowhere else to turn." There was a long silence. Then the voice said, "Not my problem." Patricia felt a flash of anger cut through her fear. "Please, just hear me out. I came to these mountains to get away from other people's problems. Go back to town. If I go back to town, I will either be dead or dispossessed within a week," Patricia said, her voice rising. "Randolph Caine shot through my bedroom window last night. Before that, he poisoned my well and cut my fences. He wants my land, and he will not stop until he has it, or I am dead." Another silence, longer this time. Then, "Randolph Caine, you said?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "I know of him." The voice was closer now, though she still could not see its owner. "I know he claims to be a respectable businessman while he crushes anyone who stands in his way. I know he brings in hired guns from Nevada and calls it security. I know the kind of man he is." "Then help me," Patricia said. "Please." "I am not a hired gun, Miss Morrison. I am not asking you to be. I am asking you to help me protect what is mine. I can pay you not much, but something. And if you help me keep my land, there will be more." She heard the sound of boots on pine needles, and then he stepped into view, and Patricia forgot how to breathe. Xerxes Hawthorne was the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the clearing. His arms, bare beneath a worn leather vest, were corded with muscles that spoke of a life spent in hard physical labor. His chest was broad, his waist narrow, his legs like tree trunks. He wore buckskin trousers and boots that had seen better days, and his dark hair fell past his shoulders, shot through with strands of premature silver, though he could not have been older than 30. His face was all hard angles, a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of a winter sky that seemed to look straight through her. He was terrifying. He was magnificent, and he was studying her with an expression she could not read. "You rode all the way up here alone?" he asked finally. "Yes." "That was either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Patricia admitted. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "You have spine, I will give you that." He shouldered his rifle. "Tell me everything." They sat by the old cabin as the light faded, and Patricia told him. She told him about her father's death, about how Caine had made his first offer at the funeral before her father was even cold in the ground. She told him about the escalating threats, the accidents that befell anyone who worked for her until only old Miguel remained. She told him about lying awake at night, wondering if this would be the night they decided to stop scaring her and simply kill her instead. Xerxes listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, staring into the darkness between the trees. "What you are asking is dangerous," he said finally. "Caine has a dozen men at least, maybe more. He has money and influence. He could make life very difficult for anyone who stands against him." "I know," Patricia said quietly. "That is why I came to you. Because everyone else is too afraid." "And you think I am not?" "Miguel said you fear nothing and no one." Xerxes let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "Miguel's a romantic. I fear plenty of things, Miss Morrison, but I do not fear men like Randolph Caine." He turned to look at her, and in the twilight his eyes seemed to glow. "I will help you. Not for your money, though I will take it if you insist. I will help you because I hate men who use force to take what is not theirs, and because you had the courage to ride up here alone to ask." Relief flooded through Patricia so powerfully that she felt dizzy. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," Xerxes said. "This will not be easy, and it will likely get worse before it gets better. Caine will not back down just because you have someone standing with you. He will push harder. I understand. Do you? He stood and she had to crane her neck to look up at him. Can you kill a man, Miss Morrison? Because that might be what it comes to. Patricia swallowed hard. If it is him or me, then yes, I can. He nodded slowly. Then we leave at first light. I need to see your land, understand what we are defending, and I want to have words with Randolph Caine. They made camp there by the old cabin. Xerxes disappeared into the woods and returned with a rabbit he had caught in a snare, which he skinned and cooked over a small fire. They ate in companionable silence, and Patricia found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. Everything about him spoke of contained strength, of a man who had no need to prove anything to anyone. He moved with an economy of motion that suggested he never wasted energy, and when he did speak, his words were careful and measured. How long have you been up here? She asked as they finished eating. 5 years, give or take. Do you never get lonely? He glanced at her. Lonely? No. Solitude is not loneliness, Miss Morrison. Solitude is peace. Patricia, she said. You can call me Patricia. Patricia, he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made warmth spread through her chest. You should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. She wanted to talk more, to learn more about this mysterious man who had agreed to help her, but exhaustion was pulling at her. She had barely slept the night before, and the long ride had taken its toll. She curled up in her bedroll near the fire, and the last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Xerxes, sitting with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch over the darkness. She woke to the smell of coffee and pine smoke. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Xerxes was already up, moving around the camp with quiet efficiency. He had watered and fed her horse, packed away the camp supplies, and made coffee over the rekindled fire. You should have woken me, Patricia said, sitting up and pushing her hair out of her face. You needed the sleep. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. Drink. We have a ways to ride. They descended from the mountains as the sun climbed higher, and with each mile, Patricia felt her anxiety returning. What would happen when they reached her ranch? Would Caine's men be there already? Would there be violence? But when they arrived in the early afternoon, everything seemed peaceful. Miguel was mending fence, and he dropped his tools when he saw them approaching, his eyes widening as he took in Xerxes. Madre de Dios, he muttered. The stories are true. Xerxes dismounted and extended his hand. Xerxes Hawthorne. Miguel shook it, looking slightly dazed. Miguel Reyes. Thank you for coming, senor. Show me around, Xerxes said. I want to see everything, the house, the outbuildings, the fences, the water. I need to know this land. They spent the rest of the afternoon touring the property. Patricia watched as Xerxes studied everything with a tactical eye, noting vulnerabilities and strengths. Her ranch was modest, a sturdy 2-story house her father had built with his own hands, a barn, a chicken coop, and corrals for the horses. She had only about 30 head of cattle left, down from the 100 her father had once run. Caine's harassment had forced her to sell most of them. The house is well built, Xerxes said finally. Stone foundation, thick walls. It will hold against anything short of artillery. The barn is more vulnerable, but we can shore it up. Your main problem is that you are exposed from 3 sides. Anyone could ride up here with no warning. What do you suggest? Patricia asked. We set up a warning system, bells or tripwires, and we make it clear that you are no longer an easy target. He looked at her. Tomorrow I go into town and have a conversation with Caine. Is that wise? He has men everywhere. Let him. I want him to know that things have changed. That night, they ate dinner in Patricia's kitchen, a simple meal of beans and cornbread, but it felt almost festive after the hardship of the past months. Miguel regaled them with stories about Coloma's early days as a gold rush town, back in 1848 when James Marshall first discovered gold at Sutter's Mill. The town had been booming then, full of prospectors and dreamers. Now it was quieter. The easy gold long since panned out, leaving behind a more settled community and opportunists like Randolph Caine who had found other ways to strike it rich. After dinner, Miguel retired to his small cabin behind the barn, leaving Patricia and Xerxes alone. She made more coffee, and they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. You do not have to do this alone anymore, Xerxes said quietly. I want you to know that. Patricia felt tears prick her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. I have been alone for so long. Since my father died, it has just been me and Miguel trying to hold on. I did not realize how heavy it was until just now, having someone else here to share the weight. You are stronger than you know, Patricia. Most women, most men for that matter, would have given up already. I thought about it, she admitted. When they poisoned the well, I almost did. But then I thought about my father, about how hard he worked to build this place, and I could not just walk away. Xerxes was quiet for a moment, then said, My father built something too. A farm in Pennsylvania. He worked that land for 40 years. Then some men with money decided they wanted to run a railroad through it. When he refused to sell, they burned him out. He died trying to save the house. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Patricia could hear the pain beneath it. That was a long time ago, but I never forgot. So when I say I understand why you were fighting, I mean it. Without thinking, Patricia reached out and took his hand. It was huge, calloused, and warm, and he stiffened at the touch before slowly relaxing. I'm sorry, she said softly. I'm sorry that happened to you. It made me who I am. He looked down at their joined hands, then gently squeezed before letting go. Get some sleep, Patricia. Tomorrow starts our real work. The next morning, Xerxes rode into Coloma alone. Patricia had wanted to come, but he had been firm in his refusal. This first meeting needed to be just between him and Caine, man to man. Or rather, man to snake, he thought grimly as he guided his horse down the main street of town. Coloma was a typical mining town that had survived past its initial boom. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a few churches, a schoolhouse, and more saloons than any town its size needed. People stopped to stare as he passed. He knew how he looked, riding in from the mountains on his big roan horse, armed and dangerous. Good. Let them stare. Let word get back to Caine that someone new was in town. He found Caine's office easily enough, a large building near the center of town with Caine Cattle Company painted across the front in gold letters. Xerxes tied his horse and walked in without knocking. The front room was furnished like a gentleman's club leather chairs, expensive rugs, paintings on the walls. A young man sitting at a desk looked up, startled. Can I help you? He asked nervously. I am here to see Randolph Caine. Do you have an appointment? No, but he will want to see me. The young man looked uncertain. I will see if he is available. Who should I say is calling? Tell him it is about the Morrison ranch. That got a reaction. The young man's eyes widened, and he disappeared through a door at the back. Xerxes waited, taking in the opulence of the room. This was what Caine's greed had bought him: comfort and luxury, built on the backs of people like Patricia and her father. The young man returned. Mr. Caine will see you. The office beyond was even more lavish. Randolph Caine sat behind an enormous mahogany desk, a cigar in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other, despite the early hour. He was a big man gone soft, probably in his 50s, with thinning hair and cold blue eyes. Two men stood against the wall behind him, hired muscle, trying to look intimidating. Oh, Caine said, looking Xerxes up and down. You are the mountain man I have heard so much about. Xerxes Hawthorne, is it? It is. What brings you down from your cave? I did not think you cared about civilization anymore. I do not, but I care about justice. Caine laughed, a harsh sound. Justice? Is that what Patricia Morrison told you this is about? Let me guess she came crying to you about how the big bad cattle baron is trying to steal her land. She told me you have been terrorizing her, cut fences, poisoned wells, gunshots through windows in the middle of the night. I do not know what you are talking about, Caine said smoothly. There's a lot of lawlessness in these parts, drifters, outlaws. A woman living alone is naturally vulnerable, which is exactly why she should accept my very generous offer to buy her out. I would be doing her a favor. You would be stealing from her. Caine's face hardened. Choose your words carefully. Hawthorne, I am a respected businessman in this town. You are a bully and a thief, Xerxes said flatly, and your harassment of Patricia Morrison ends now. One of the hired men pushed off the wall, but Caine waved him back. Or what? You will stop me? You, one man against everything I can bring to bear? If necessary. Caine studied him for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you how this works, Hawthorne. I own this town. The sheriff, the judge, the mayor, they all answer to me. If I want that land, I will get it, and there is nothing you or anyone else can do to stop me. The only question is how much blood gets spilled along the way." "Then I suppose we will find out," Xerxes said. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. "One more thing, Caine. If anything happens to Patricia Morrison, I will hold you personally responsible, and I will not go to the sheriff about it." He walked out before Caine could respond, feeling the cattle baron's fury like a physical thing at his back. As he rode out of town, he noticed people watching from windows and doorways. Word would spread fast. Good. Let everyone know that Patricia was no longer alone. He made one more stop before leaving Coloma, the general store. The owner, a thin, nervous man named Elias, was arranging tins on a shelf when Xerxes walked in. "Mr. Hawthorne," Elias said, surprised. "I was not expecting to see you until spring." "I need supplies," Xerxes said, "ammunition mostly, and I need you to answer a question." Of course." Elias hurried to gather what Xerxes requested. "What is the question?" "The things that have been happening to Patricia Morrison, the vandalism, the threats. What have people been saying about it?" Elias looked uncomfortable. "I do not like to spread gossip." "I am not asking for gossip. I am asking for truth." The store owner glanced at the door, then lowered his voice. "Everyone knows it is Caine's men doing it. They have been seen riding out toward her place at night, but no one will say anything because everyone is afraid. Caine controls too much. If you cross him, you lose everything." "Not anymore," Xerxes said. "Anyone gives her trouble now, they answer to me." He paid for his supplies and rode back to the Morrison ranch, arriving in late afternoon. Patricia came out to meet him, her face anxious. "How did it go?" she asked. "About as expected. Caine made threats. I made counter-threats. Now we wait and see what he does." "Do you think he will back down?" "No," Xerxes said honestly. "He is going to escalate. Men like him cannot stand to be challenged. But at least now he knows you are not alone, and that will make him think twice before acting." That night passed quietly, as did the next day. Xerxes spent the time fortifying the ranch, setting up tripwires with bells, reinforcing the barn door, teaching Patricia and Miguel how to shoot better. Patricia was a fair shot with a rifle already, but Xerxes showed her how to shoot in low light, how to reload quickly, how to stay calm under pressure. Working alongside him, Patricia found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with safety or protection. She noticed the way his muscles flexed when he lifted heavy beams, the competent grace with which he moved, the quiet confidence that radiated from him like heat from a fire. When he stood close to show her proper rifle stance, his chest against her back as he adjusted her grip, she felt her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at having help after so long alone. But she knew it was more than that. On the third night, the attack came. Patricia woke to the sound of bells clanging frantically. She was on her feet instantly, grabbing her rifle as she ran to the window. In the moonlight, she could see men on horseback, 4 of them, maybe 5, riding toward the barn with torches. "They're going to burn us out," she shouted. Xerxes appeared in her doorway, already dressed and armed. "Stay in the house. Cover me from the window." "You cannot go out there alone." But he was already moving, taking the stairs 3 at a time. Patricia ran to the window and threw it open, her rifle at her shoulder. She could see the riders more clearly now, 5 men, faces covered with bandanas. One was already dismounting, torch in hand, heading for the barn door. Xerxes burst out of the house and fired a single shot that sent the torch spinning from the man's hand. The riders wheeled their horses around, surprised by the resistance. "Get off this property," Xerxes roared, his voice carrying across the yard like thunder. Instead of fleeing, the men opened fire. Patricia squeezed her trigger, aiming high over their heads in warning. The muzzle flash lit up her room, and the crack of gunfire was deafening. Xerxes had taken cover behind the water trough and was returning fire with deadly accuracy. One rider cried out and slumped in his saddle. Another's horse screamed and reared, throwing its rider. The men who could still fight seemed to realize they had badly misjudged the situation and turned to flee. But their leader, a big man on a black horse, fired one last shot as he rode away. Patricia heard the bullet strike wood somewhere below her. Then they were gone, galloping away into the darkness. Patricia ran downstairs and found Xerxes checking the barn. The torch had gone out in the dirt before it could catch anything on fire. Miguel emerged from his cabin, rifle in hand. "Is everyone all right?" Patricia asked breathlessly. "I am fine," Miguel said. "Senor Hawthorne." "I am unhurt," Xerxes said. He was examining something on the ground, the man who had been thrown from his horse. The man was groaning, holding his arm. Xerxes hauled him up roughly. "Who sent you?" "I do not know what you are talking about," the man gasped. Xerxes slammed him against the barn wall. "Do not lie to me! Was it Caine?" "I am just a ranch hand. I was told to come here and scare the woman, that is all." "Scare her by burning her out? That is not scaring. That is murdering." Xerxes' voice was deadly quiet. "Tell Caine this. Tell him that if he sends men here again, some of them will not ride home. Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically. Xerxes released him, and he stumbled to where his horse was grazing nearby, mounted clumsily with his injured arm, and rode off into the darkness. Patricia found she was shaking, not from fear, but from the aftermath of violence. Xerxes turned to her, and his expression softened. "You did well," he said gently. "Your shooting kept them pinned down." I was terrified. Being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means acting despite the fear. He hesitated, then reached out and touched her shoulder briefly. "You should try to get some rest. I will keep watch. You cannot stay up all night every night. I have gone longer without sleep. Come morning, we will work out a watch rotation." But Patricia could not sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of the night and thinking about what had almost happened. They had been lucky. If Xerxes had not been there, if the warning bells had not alerted them, she would have died tonight, burned alive in her own home. When dawn finally came, she found Xerxes on the porch, watching the eastern sky lighten. She brought him coffee and they sat together in silence. "This will not stop," she said finally. "Caine will keep sending men until we are dead or driven off." "Probably," Xerxes agreed, "unless we change the game." "What do you mean?" "We have been on defense, waiting for him to attack. It is time to go on offense." "How?" Xerxes was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Caine's power comes from fear and money. We cannot touch his money, but we can take away the fear. The people in Coloma know he is behind this, but they are too afraid to speak up. If we can get them to stand with you, to publicly support you, Caine loses his power to intimidate." "But how do we do that?" "We give them a reason to hope. We show them that Caine can be beaten." Over the next few days, Xerxes made multiple trips into Coloma, talking to people quietly. He spoke to store owners, small ranchers, farmers, all the people who had been pushed around by Caine over the years but who had been too afraid to do anything about it. He told them about Patricia's stand, about how she refused to be driven off her land. He asked them if they were tired of living in fear. Slowly, carefully, he built a coalition. Meanwhile, Patricia threw herself into work around the ranch, trying to repair the damage of months of neglect. Xerxes helped when he was not in town, and she found herself treasuring these moments working side by side with him, learning about his life in small pieces that he shared like precious gifts. He had been a soldier in the war, she learned, fighting for the Union. He had seen terrible things, done terrible things, and come west afterward looking for peace. He had tried living in cities, in towns, but found that he could not stand being around people anymore, not after everything he had seen. So he had gone to the mountains, built himself a cabin, and lived off the land. "Do you never want companionship?" Patricia asked one afternoon as they mended fence together. "I have companionship. The mountains, the animals, the seasons, they are companion enough. But do you never want—" She trailed off, feeling her cheeks heat. He looked at her and something flickered in his winter sky eyes. "What? A woman? A family?" "Yes." "I thought I had given up on that," he said slowly. "I thought I was too damaged, too changed by the war to ever be the kind of man a woman would want. But lately—" "Lately what?" He held her gaze. "Lately I've been remembering what it feels like to want something more than just survival." Patricia's breath caught. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her skin feel too warm and her heart beat too fast. They were standing very close, and she could see the way his pupils dilated, could see the pulse beating in his throat. "Xerxes," she whispered. He stepped back suddenly, breaking the moment. "We should finish this fence before dark." Patricia wanted to scream with frustration, but she understood. He was keeping himself in check, maintaining proper distance. He was here to help her, to protect her, not to court her. She told herself she should appreciate his restraint, his honor. But God help her, she wanted him to kiss her. The change came suddenly. One morning, a delegation arrived at the ranch, 6 men and 2 women, small ranchers and business owners from Coloma. They stood in Patricia's yard, hats in hands, and told her they were with her. "We are tired of Caine running roughshod over everyone," said Thomas Whitfield, who owned a small spread north of town. "Your man Hawthorne, he made us realize we have been cowards. There are more of us than there are of Caine's hired guns. If we stand together, he cannot touch us." Patricia felt tears in her eyes. Thank you all so much." "We are going to the sheriff," said Margaret Chen, who ran the boarding house. "We are going to demand he investigate the attacks on your property, and if he refuses, we are going to the territorial governor." "Caine owns the sheriff," Patricia said. "He does," Margaret agreed, "but he does not own all of us, and we are going to make enough noise that he cannot ignore it anymore." True to their word, the delegation marched into town that very day and demanded to see Sheriff Dawson. What happened in that meeting, Patricia only heard about later. How they had confronted Dawson with evidence of Caine's harassment, how they had threatened to go over his head if he did not act, how Dawson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, had reluctantly agreed to bring Caine in for questioning. Of course, Caine denied everything, but the damage was done. The town was talking, and for the first time, they were not talking in whispers. They were speaking openly about Caine's tactics, about his bullying, about the way he had terrorized anyone who stood in his way. 3 days later, a rider arrived from Sacramento. He wore a badge and carried papers from the territorial governor's office. He spent a week in Coloma, interviewing people, investigating claims, and at the end of that week, he arrested 2 of Caine's men for arson and attempted murder. Patricia stood in the street with Xerxes and watched as the men were taken away in chains. Caine himself stood on the porch of his office, his face purple with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The tide had turned against him. "It is not over," Xerxes warned. "He still has money and influence. He will find other ways to come at you." "But we have broken his hold on the town. That is something." "It is everything," Xerxes agreed. That night, Patricia insisted on celebrating. She made a real dinner: roast chicken, fresh bread, apple pie made from the last of her stored apples. Miguel joined them, and for a few hours they forgot about Randolph Caine and simply enjoyed being alive, being together, being safe. After Miguel retired, Patricia and Xerxes sat on the porch again, as had become their habit. The September night was cool, autumn making itself felt in the high country. "What will you do now?" Patricia asked. "Will you go back to your mountain?" Xerxes was quiet for a long time. "I suppose I should. But I find I am not eager to go." Patricia's heart leaped. "You could stay. I mean, there is plenty of work here, and I could pay you proper wages now that I'm not spending everything on repairs and security. I could use a foreman, someone to help me build the herd back up." "Is that what you want? A foreman?" She turned to look at him. The moonlight silvered his hair and cast his face in sharp relief. "No," she said honestly, "that is not what I want." "What do you want, Patricia?" "You," she whispered. "I want you." He closed his eyes briefly. "You do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I am saying. I am saying that somewhere between being terrified out of my mind and learning to trust again, I fell in love with you. I'm saying that when I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. I am saying—" He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and hungry, months of restraint breaking all at once. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, and she made a small sound of surprise and pleasure against his mouth. She'd been kissed before, chaste kisses from boys at church socials, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the intensity of his desire, for the way her body responded to his, for the feeling of being consumed and cherished all at once. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," he said roughly. "I've been fighting it because I thought I had no right, because I am just a half-wild hermit with nothing to offer you. But I love you, Patricia Morrison, and if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life proving it. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will have you. I will have you any way I can get you. He kissed her again, gentler this time, but no less passionate. And when he swept her into his arms and carried her into the house, she went willingly, joyfully, knowing that she was choosing her own future at last. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with wonder and care. Xerxes was gentle despite his size and strength, constantly checking to make sure she was all right, that he was not hurting her. Patricia, for her part, marveled at the feel of him, the hardness of his muscles under her hands, the roughness of his beard against her skin, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her bed, the moonlight streaming through the window, and Patricia felt more at peace than she had in months, years maybe. "Marry me," Xerxes said suddenly. She raised her head to look at him. "What?" "Marry me. I know I should court you properly, wait a respectable amount of time, do things right, but I do not want to wait. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." "Yes," Patricia said, smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in Coloma's small church, with half the town in attendance. Margaret Chen cried openly, and even old Miguel had to wipe his eyes. Patricia wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had altered to fit, and Xerxes wore new clothes bought from the general store, proper trousers, and a white shirt that made him look civilized, though nothing could truly tame the wildness in him. As they exchanged vows, Patricia looked into his eyes and saw her future, stretching out before them, a future of hard work and simple joys, of building something lasting together, of love that would weather any storm. Randolph Caine did not attend the wedding. In fact, he had left Coloma entirely, driven out by scandal and legal troubles. With his hired guns in jail and facing trial, and with the territorial governor taking an interest in his business practices, Caine had decided to cut his losses and relocate to Nevada. His cattle company was being dissolved, his assets sold off to pay fines and legal fees. "Good riddance," Miguel said at the wedding reception. "May we never see his kind again." "We will see his kind again," Xerxes said, his arm around Patricia's waist. "Men like Caine are everywhere. But now we know that they can be beaten if good people stand together." Patricia and Xerxes honeymooned by taking a week to themselves at the ranch, sending Miguel to stay with friends in town. They spent the days working side by side, strengthening what would now be their shared home, and the nights learning every inch of each other, building an intimacy that went far beyond the physical. Xerxes told her more about his past, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke him, about the guilt he carried for things he had done during the war. Patricia listened and held him and told him that the past did not define him, that the man he was now, the man who had protected her, who had helped her save her home, was the man she loved. As autumn deepened into winter, they settled into married life. Xerxes proved to be as skilled at ranching as he was at survival. Under his management, the herd began to grow again. He bought cattle cheap from a rancher in the next valley over who was retiring, negotiated good prices for their beef in Sacramento, and began plans to expand their grazing land. But he never lost his love for the wilderness. Once a month, he would disappear into the mountains for a few days, and Patricia learned not to worry. He always came back, and he always brought gifts of freshly killed deer, wild herbs for cooking, once even a nugget of gold he had found in a stream. "My wild man," she would tease, and he would sweep her into his arms and carry her to bed, proving just how wild he could be. In the spring of 1877, Patricia discovered she was pregnant. She told Xerxes one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and for a long moment he simply stared at her in wonder. "A child?" he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a child?" "Yes, in late autumn, the doctor thinks." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt dampness on her neck and realized he was crying. "I never thought I would have this," he said. "A wife, a child, a home. I thought I had given up any chance at a normal life." "This is not normal," Patricia said, laughing through her own tears. "This is extraordinary." Their son was born on a crisp October evening, with Margaret Chen serving as midwife and Xerxes pacing anxiously downstairs. When Margaret finally called him up and placed the baby in his arms, Xerxes looked down at the tiny red-faced creature and fell completely in love. They named him Nathaniel Thomas Hawthorne, after both their fathers, but they called him Nate. He was a healthy, loud baby with his father's strong lungs and his mother's dark eyes. Xerxes proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with Nate when he cried, building an elaborate cradle with his own hands, talking to his son constantly, even though the baby could not possibly understand. "He needs to know my voice," Xerxes explained when Patricia teased him about it. "He needs to know his father will always be there." As Nate grew, the ranch prospered. Word had spread about how Patricia and Xerxes had stood up to Randolph Caine, and other small ranchers began coming to them for advice, for solidarity. They formed a sort of cooperative, helping each other with roundups and cattle drives, standing together against anyone who tried to bully them. Xerxes became a respected figure in the community despite his hermit past. People knew they could count on him to be fair, to be honest, to stand up for what was right. He served as a mediator in disputes, helped hunt down cattle thieves, and once even saved a child from drowning in the Feather River. But his true joy was his family. Patricia had never seen a man so devoted to his wife and child. He came in from a hard day's work and immediately took Nate so Patricia could rest. He taught his son to walk, to ride, to shoot, to read. And every night he held Patricia close and told her how grateful he was for the life they had built together. In 1879, their daughter was born, a tiny, fierce little thing they named Rose Elizabeth. Nate, then 2 years old, was suspicious of her at first, but gradually became her devoted protector. Xerxes walked around in a daze for weeks, unable to believe his good fortune. "Two perfect children and the most amazing woman in the world," he said to Patricia one night as they watched their children sleep. "How did I get so lucky?" "We made our own luck," Patricia said. "We fought for it." The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. The ranch continued to grow. They added more land, more cattle, built a bigger barn. Nate grew tall and strong like his father, quiet and thoughtful. Rose was all fire and laughter, fearless from the day she was born. In 1882, their second daughter arrived, Grace Margaret, named for Patricia's mother and for Margaret Chen, who had been such a good friend. Through it all, Patricia and Xerxes' love only deepened. They had weathered the initial storms of their courtship and marriage, and what remained was something solid and unshakable. They still made love with the same passion as in their early days, still talked long into the night about their dreams and fears, still chose each other every single day. Miguel lived to see all 3 grandchildren born, as he called them, and died peacefully in his sleep in 1883 at the age of 77. They buried him on the ranch under an oak tree he had always loved, and Xerxes carved a beautiful headstone with his own hands. By 1885, the ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They ran nearly 300 head of cattle, supplied beef to Sacramento and beyond, and employed 4 full-time ranch hands. Nate, now 8, was already helping with the cattle, riding alongside his father with pride. Rose, at 6, could rope a calf better than most grown men. And little Grace, at 3, followed her siblings everywhere, determined not to be left behind. One evening in late summer, Patricia and Xerxes stood on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Nate was teaching Rose and Grace to whittle, just as Xerxes had taught him. "Do you ever miss it?" Patricia asked quietly. "The mountains, the solitude?" "Sometimes," Xerxes admitted. "But then I look at this, at you, at our children, at everything we have built, and I know I made the right choice. The mountains will always be there if I need them. But this family, this life, this is everything I never knew I wanted." Patricia leaned into him and he wrapped his arm around her. "I never thanked you properly," she said. "For what?" "For making sure I was never scared again, for standing with me when no one else would, for loving me." "Patricia, you saved me as much as I saved you. Before I met you, I was just existing, not living. You gave me a reason to come down from that mountain and join the world again." He kissed the top of her head. "I am the one who should be thanking you." As the sun set over the California foothills, turning the sky gold and crimson, Patricia Morrison Hawthorne stood in her husband's arms and felt completely, perfectly content. She had fought for her land, for her future, and she had won. But more than that, she had found love with a man who cherished her, who stood beside her as an equal partner, who had given her a family and a life beyond anything she had dared to dream. The cattle baron had wanted her land and tried to scare her, but the mountain man had made sure she was never scared again. And in doing so, he had given her not just protection, but love. Not just security, but joy. Not just a defender, but a partner for life. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, one by one like tiny promises, Patricia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that was what love meant, that was what marriage meant, and that was what they had built here, on this land they had fought so hard to keep. Their children's laughter rang out across the yard, and Xerxes smiled. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let us go join them." And they did, walking together into the gathering dusk, into the life they had made with their own hands, their own courage, their own love. Years later, when Nate was grown with children of his own, he would ask his father about those early days, about how he had met his mother, about the fight with Randolph Caine. And Xerxes would tell him the story, not sparing the darker parts, because it was important for his children to understand that everything worth having was worth fighting for. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever met," Xerxes would say. "She stood alone against forces that would have broken most men, and when I came down from my mountain to help her, I thought I was the one doing the saving. But the truth is, she saved me. She gave me a reason to live again, to love again, to believe that the world held more than just pain and violence." And Nate would look at his parents, his father with his silver hair and still strong frame, his mother with her laugh lines and gentle hands, and understand that love was not just about passion or romance. It was about standing together in the face of adversity. It was about choosing each other, again and again, through good times and bad. The Morrison Hawthorne Ranch would remain in the family for generations, a testament to Patricia's courage and Xerxes' strength. And every child born into that family would hear the story of how their great-great-grandmother refused to be driven from her land, and how a mountain man came down from the high country to stand beside her. But that was all in the future. On this September evening in 1885, Patricia and Xerxes were simply two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through determination and love, who had created something beautiful and lasting in a wild, unforgiving land. And as they sat around the dinner table with their children, laughing and talking and planning for tomorrow, they knew they had everything they would ever need. They had each other, they had their family, and they had the land they had fought so hard to keep. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Xerxes reached across the table and took Patricia's hand, and she squeezed back, a silent communication that needed no words. After all these years, they still shared that connection, that deep understanding that transcended language. "I love you," he mouthed. "I love you too," she mouthed back. And in the warm glow of the lamplight, with their children's voices rising around them, they smiled at each other with the contentment of two people who had found their home, not just in a place, but in each other. The Wild West had been hard on them, had tested them in ways they never could have imagined, but they had passed those tests together, and they had emerged stronger for it. The cattle baron had tried to break Patricia Morrison, but he had not counted on her courage, her determination, and most of all, on the love of a mountain man who had chosen to stand beside her. And that made all the difference. The end of their story was really just the beginning of a legacy that would last for generations, built on the foundation of courage, love, and the willingness to fight for what was right. The ranch would stand for over 100 years, a symbol of what could be achieved when good people refused to back down in the face of injustice. But more than the ranch, more than the land or the cattle or the prosperity they achieved, their true legacy was the love they shared. It was a love that had been forged in fire and tested by adversity, a love that had grown deeper and stronger with each passing year. It was the kind of love that poets write about, and that ordinary people dream of, a love that was both passionate and comfortable, exciting and safe, wild and tame all at once. As the night deepened and the children were finally coaxed into bed, Patricia and Xerxes stood on their porch one more time, looking out at the land they had saved together. No regrets? Patricia asked softly. Not a single one, Xerxes replied, pulling her close. You? Only that I did not find you sooner. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Everything happens in its own time. We found each other when we needed to, and that is what matters. They stood there in the comfortable silence of long companionship, two souls who had found their perfect match in each other. The mountains rose in the distance, dark against the star-filled sky, and somewhere up there was the cabin where Xerxes had once lived alone, believing he was content with solitude. But he knew better now. He knew that true contentment came not from isolation, but from connection, not from avoiding life, but from embracing it fully, with all its messiness and challenges and joys. And most of all, from loving someone with your whole heart and being loved equally in return. Come to bed, Patricia said finally. Tomorrow is another early day. Tomorrow is always another early day on a ranch, Xerxes said, but he followed her inside, his hand warm in hers. And as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, passing the rooms where their children slept peacefully, Patricia Morrison Hawthorne said a silent prayer of gratitude for the life she had been given. She had started out scared and alone, facing impossible odds, but she had refused to give up, and that refusal had brought her everything she had ever wanted. She had her land, she had her home, she had her children, and most importantly, she had the love of a good man who would stand beside her through anything. What more could anyone ask for? As they settled into bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Patricia whispered one more thing. Thank you for making sure I was never scared again. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop hiding, Xerxes replied. And they fell asleep together, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it side by side, just as they always had. Because that was what love meant. That was what marriage meant. That was what home meant. And they had found it all here in the Wild West, against all odds, through courage and determination, and the simple decision to stand together when the world tried to tear them apart. Their story could have ended in tragedy. Patricia could have been driven from her land, or worse. Xerxes could have stayed in his mountains, alone and isolated until the end of his days. But instead, they had found each other. They had fought together. They had loved together. And they had built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.